We looked at robot. Now we need to look at the whole concept of what we mean by social.
Yes.
And when we talk about a social robot.
Here we have in the image, as you can see, a human being holding the hand of a robot. Increasingly, we're looking at human-robot interactions, HRI, to give it its jargon term. It would be absurd to imagine a social robot without the ability of humans to engage, to interact with the robot, Perry, in a verbal or a non-verbal communicative way.
So a robot sitting on a desert island by itself wouldn't be a social robot.
Well, because it would have no meaning.
Yeah.
We imbue, do we not, the technology we use, our environments with the meaning that gives it the purpose that we go on to utilize.
Okay, so a social robot, in a sense, is a robot that's operating socially at the first level.
Precisely.
So it is interacting with humans.
Yes.
And this robot has been made to look more social. Like many robots, it has a humanoid experience.
Yes.
It has those big eyes to make it an attractive-looking robot. It has arms and a torso to mimic the human body. And it has a little hat on its head just to make it a bit more humanoid. What do we mean by interaction then?
It's the ability, isn't it, to perceive that there's a connection with an entity. There's also a sense that one is being recognized in this interaction by the other entity. And this is what gives meaning to our social engagements. It's about recognition, I think, at its essence.
So at the moment we're talking into a camera.
Yeah.
There it is in front of us.
Yeah.
In a sense, that camera doesn't recognize us. If we left the room, it would continue to record the images, and if a dog or a cat came in, it would record that. The camera isn't interacting with us in a way that a robot might be interacting. So the camera, in a sense, isn't social in a way that a robot might be. So how does the robot know then that how does it know about us?
It has a number of sensors, so it has the ability to pick up on sound, to pick up on touch. It has cameras, so it can recognize facial expressions, so it can understand if we're happy in its own artificial neural world, if you will. It can understand if we're sad. It can understand if we are agitated. Through artificial intelligence, through algorithms, it can then decide what type of response is appropriate to our particular need.
Okay, so a robot can tell if we're happy because it has technology built into it that can look at our face and how our lips move, our eyes, our eyebrows, our cheeks, and so on.
Yes.
It can go back to a database and say, okay, what I'm seeing here is similar to lots and lots of other images of people that have been labeled as happy. Therefore, I know that John is happy. It doesn't know what happiness is, but it can look at a person and say, that person is happy. The same as we can look at a TV image and we can say, oh yeah, that person is happy, or they're angry, or they're sad, or they're emotional, or whatever.
Yep.
By looking at, often unconsciously for us, their facial expression, their tone of voice, how they stand or sit. Lots and lots of what we call social cues. And increasingly, a social robot is able to interact with us by recognizing these social cues through the various sensors and technologies that it has, and to communicate with us. What else makes a robot social?
Well, it can make decisions, of course, and it can adapt its behavior based on these social cues and preferences of those that it interacts with, which is quite a major, I think, breakthrough in technology. It can fulfill roles that involves this type of interaction, but it can provide us with companionship. Tamagotchi was one of the earliest types of robots that provided this great ability for particularly children, but adults use it as well, to forge a connection with the actual robot and befriend them, and this just creates a sense of companionship and belonging in a world that increasingly is characterized by loneliness and people feeling isolated. So a social robot has this ability also to provide perhaps therapeutic support. And I'm thinking here again about perhaps a Paro in the context of a child with autism. So I think, they do provide and perform roles in the social space that increasingly research suggests is perhaps more effective than human care. And that's quite a controversial thing to say, isn't it? But in particular, I'm thinking about repetitive behavior that might frustrate a human being, but and lead to a degree of frustration for both the client and the actual human carer. But a social robot wouldn't experience that level of frustration.
And you made a very interesting point there about robots could care for us, but we also can care for robots. And you mentioned the Tamagotchi there, and I'd say for a lot of people watching this, have probably never seen a Tamagotchi or even heard of one. But my son had one many years ago, and these were these little plastic devices, very, very primitive, I suppose, electronically from what we have now, but a little electronic device that you sort of cared for it in a sense by pressing buttons and interacting with it through pressing buttons and recharging it. And that in a sense was feeding this device, which then made it express happiness and so on. So, it's a two-way thing then, I suppose, so that we can think of robots caring for us or interacting with us, but we also interact with the robots. And that what makes it social rather than just a one-way thing. Social requires two parties. And then what's this thing about design then? How does design come in?
Well, increasingly in terms of best practice, we would look at this from a user experience perspective. So rather than myself and Perry were two hipster algorithm writers living in the west coast of America, commissioned to design an algorithm, a program for a new social robot, to help unfulfilled academics in their academic career, for instance. We now, rather than working on our own in isolation, would be probably compelled, Perry, to interview as many academics as we possibly could to work out what their particular need for an academic support robot might be in their lives. And so we would then test out our new robot with our algorithm that was geared towards empowering and helping overworked academics, and get their feedback, and accordingly make some changes and revisions to the algorithm and to the robot's purpose and functionality based on that particular research. So, I think this is really important, and that's just an extreme hypothetical example. Of course, we're well beyond the need for robots in our lives, much worse than that. But, if you think about a primary school teacher who's hard-pressed, who's got perhaps great diversity in the class now, linguistically, culturally, in terms of learning abilities, and we were to introduce a robot to help as an assistant teacher, we would increasingly want to trial the robot and pilot the robot before we would unleash it on the market.
Yeah, for a robot to be social in the sense it has to be socially useful and be able to participate within human society. And that means that it has to work in a sense socially.